Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight, we're going back to school to experience some of the horrors ex-pupils have had to go through. I am also very fortunate to be joined by our contest winner, the Dark Narrator. For all of those of you who don't remember, this contest was a few months ago, but this collaboration has been deferred until now. Lucky you. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. When I was a grad student, I was doing work with one of the university's wind tunnels, and since I was behind schedule, I was doing a lot of experimental runs late at night. One night, it's after 2 a.m, and I've just finished a run with the wind tunnel, and I'm setting up another. I'm pretty sure I'm the only person in the building. It's dead quiet, which is a relief because when the wind tunnel is running, it's so noisy that you have to wear ear protection. Suddenly, I get hit by a sudden feeling of the willies. I can't explain it. 1 second, I'm entering running parameters into the computer, and the next second, my skin is crawling and my heart is pounding. The hairs on my arm are actually standing on end, and I feel certain, with no visual proof, that I am no longer alone. It occurs to me that while the wind tunnel is operating, anybody could slip into the lab without being noticed. The door is locked, but there are plenty of keys. I wander around the lab. It's big and full of large machinery with dark corners behind it, and I'm jumping at every dark shadow I see out of the corner of my eye. It's still dead quiet. The only noise is the gentle whir coming from the fan on the computer, and the sound of my footsteps on the concrete floor. I don't find anybody, but the feeling of being watched is worse than ever. I start shutting everything down, and by the time I'm done, my hands are shaking. Thank goodness the lab doors are self-locking, because I don't think I would have been able to work a key. I literally run out of the building. Schedule be damned. I never worked on the wind tunnels late at night again.
In my freshman year of high school, I had recently moved to a smaller town in Michigan. Being raised in Atlanta for the majority of my life, I stuck out. Apparently, my unusual behavior was too much for a particular girl to handle. I only had one class with this girl, but she saw me enough to take a personal hatred for me. She was a chubby short girl with an appearance I can only really describe as being a lesbian, which she was. She suffered from quite a few mental illnesses, and somehow I triggered them from the beginning. My first time meeting her, she had self-harmed in front of me, seeming to be out of nowhere. For a few weeks, it was mostly evil looks, but nothing more. That is, until she found my MySpace and the start of a Facebook page through a mutual friend. I'll go ahead and say I went through some stuff as a kid and may have been very open about my experience in order to help others. She used that as ammo against me. After returning to school one weekend, she had printed out copies of a post I had made about past physical abuse. She handed them out like flyers to her friends and pointed out any small inconsistency in order to peg me as a liar. That was abruptly cut off by the teacher, but the message was clear. That night, I got a MySpace connection request from an account that seemed bland and unimportant. Little did I know, allowing them to view my page was an awful idea. Within hours, they had taken to photographing my face onto various nude bodies and posting them around my MySpace. They were crudely done and looked nothing like me. But I was angry. I went to the police and principal the next morning. Awful choice. They pulled her in, and she apologized as well as sobbing and blaming one of her illnesses. I accepted it, but I was still very heated on the matter. I later learned that she had no remorse. I received threats from her via online comments the same night. Things along the lines of, "I'll beat you up," or "Don't walk home alone again." I was straight back in the office the next morning where I was assured it'd be handled. The threats that night were worse, leaning more into violent things such as breaking my arms and promising she would make me pay. I went through a long cycle of going to the school office about it and then receiving worse threats afterwards and having to go back the next day. After a week or two, she began using violent death threats. She claimed she'd snap my neck like a puppy and put me 6 feet below, or I'd pay for the things I had done to her. The office that day told me not to come back. I was assured she would be controlled. I was oblivious to the fact that during these incidents, the girl and her mother were building up the story I was faking these to pick on her due to her illnesses. Being an outsider, other students didn't have an issue believing it. The school had heard these rumors as well, and it slowly seeped into their heads. The threats each night continued, which I had taken to ignoring. She would make claims she would slit my throat without anyone finding her, and other bogus but violent things. She went back to her old antics as well, spreading rumors about my abuse or foregoing fake photos about me. Eventually, after this went on for about 4 or 5 months, I snapped back. I told her if she wanted to hurt me, then go ahead. I wouldn't sit victim to her taunting anymore, and she could do what she wanted to me. That's when she went to the office. Long story short, I got a 3-day suspension for bullying. After returning from that unnecessary break, she awaited me in the lunch line. An older, senior boy approached me and asked if I would help pick up something from the gym. I obliged just to have an excuse to be away from people. Said girl, as well as another boy, were waiting for me in the empty gym, where I received a vicious beating. I ran to the principal's office, now missing chunks of hair and bleeding from my forehead. I was in there for an hour until they finally decided she would receive a 3-day suspension and the other 2 would get 2 days of all-day detention. My father heard of this and snapped. He picked me up from the school and marched me to the police station, where we pressed charges for assault and harassment. It was months before we received any word from the police, but the girl was finally put on probation, and now has to miss school once a week to see her officer. She was moved into special ed classes after that. I also received a 45-day suspension for interrupting her education. I barely passed the year due to 105 absences. The threats from her did not cease until I finally moved schools. From what I've heard from the few teachers who felt sorry and kept in contact with me, she never passed freshman year. She was also involved in numerous other attacks, but couldn't be expelled due to now being in special education. Her mother sent my father a few voicemails, but they were nothing other than boasting about her child that could do nothing wrong and she would sue it for false claims. So, to the awful school admin, and the even worse brat child and her mother, let's not meet again.
This happened so many years ago. I was in 3rd or 4th grade in the early 1980s. I lived in a very rural area, with many small towns surrounded by woods. On this day, I was so excited to have permission from my parents to go directly home from school with a friend on her bus. Side note, my parents both worked long hours, unlike so many of my friends that had stay-at-home mums at the time. I was normally a latchkey kid, so anyway, I was going to go home with my friend on her bus for the first time. I even had a nice note from my mum about my trip home with my friend to hand to the bus driver after we got to the bus. I was super excited because my friend really lived in the woods. I had gone to her birthday party over summer, and we had collected fireflies and slept in an actual tent. This was so cool to me because I lived close to the town centre and didn't even own a tent. So here we were on her bus. We sat in the middle at first and then slowly moved up towards the front of the bus as kids got off. My friend lived just before the town line on a road that headed out of town, so hers was the final stop. Towards the end of the ride, we were right up in front behind the driver, who played some awesome tunes via the popular radio station WAAF. My friend, who was a bit of an odd little duck, was bopping to the beat of the song on the radio, while I was just looking out of the front window of the bus directly behind the driver. Just then the driver turned his head to me and said, "Hey, what would you girls do if I didn't drop you off?" I was instantly spooked and looked towards my friend, who was still bopping away to the song. "What?" I stammered. I was not used to talking to adults I didn't know, but I knew what I heard. "Oh, nothing," he replied. He was just pulling up to my friend's stop and pulled over and let us out. I have thought about this many times over the years, wondering why he would have said that. Then I wonder, what if my friend's mum wasn't home? Would he have stopped or driven us to the middle of nowhere? Also, since this was her everyday bus, why wasn't that creep a worry for my friend? I have since gone to grow up and raise kids in the same area, but can't help but think about why that driver picked that day to get all weird. I never told any adults, as I was a kid, and after we got off the bus it was no longer a concern. But yeah, creepy bus driver, please, let's not meet again.
So this story stretches from 6th to maybe early 7th grade in middle school. So I had a hard time making friends for a majority of primary and middle school because my family moved around a lot. So it was hard to make connections with people before we moved again. However, during middle school I managed to stay until the end of 8th grade because of my parents splitting up. I made one of my still best friends to this day in 6th grade, who we will call Lily. I was a few months behind and a majority of the girls in my class didn't want to hang out with me, so they all pushed me to talk to her. We quickly hit it off, and she introduced me to her other friends, one of who we will simply call Bridget. So me, my friend Lily, and Bridget became good friends, and would hang out with all the time. We would always go over to Bridget's house because she had a ton of video games, and her parents pretty much let her do whatever she wanted. We didn't talk to them much, and they didn't say a lot to us. During the end of 6th grade and into 7th, Bridget stopped showing up to school and started being homeschooled, to which was due to her being bipolar. During this time, she talked to me less and less. What I didn't know was that she started talking to my friend Lily more. Bridget would invite Lily over to her house, to which she would ask if I would be there too. Bridget told Lily that me and her were fighting, so she didn't want me coming. This was a lie, so Lily would continually decline since her mom said not to go anywhere unless I was going too. Lily one day asked me if Bridget and I were fighting, to which I said we weren't, and she told me about what had been going on. I was shocked, and during some time after, this gets a little fuzzy. I think me and Lily had both asked Bridget why she was lying over the phone one day after school. And that's when things blew up. Bridget told Lily that she had liked her and wanted to get her alone to be by themselves, and I guess was angry that I had found out about her lying to Lily and threatened to kill both of us. She said a bunch of other things that terrified us, and Lily and myself had mental breakdowns. Me, Lily, and Bridget only lived a block from one another. We all knew where each other lived, and we were all latchkey kids. The school was fairly close to all of our houses. Me and Lily lived across the street from it. This scared us, and we were afraid that she would come by and attack us at any time. She knew when our school got out, how we walked home alone, and how to get to our homes, which is very accessible. Once our moms had gotten home and we quickly told them what had happened, they alerted the school. We had stayed home for nearly a week and couldn't stop the breakdowns. After that, besides a very cryptic email full of nonsense I got years later from Bridget's email address, we never heard from her again.
This happened when I was in 1st grade. Based on the people involved, it had to have been. But just know I was very young but old enough to be in school. After school, I had to take the bus as we lived a bit too far from me to get dropped off and picked up each day. I would usually get dropped off by the bus on a random street near a different school, with a bunch of kids, and my grandma would be there waiting. The street couldn't be seen from that school, however, and it was basically just a random street with no real landmarks around it. There were some houses, but they were behind walls, so they couldn't see this street. It was a great place to grab someone and not be seen. One day my uncle had borrowed the car that was supposed to pick me up. I didn't know this at the time, so I was confused as to why my grandmother wasn't there. Since this was back in the day when little kids didn't have cell phones, I had no way to call her and to see what was going on. I was stuck there pacing back and forth since my uncle was late. All of the cars left except one, but I didn't pay it much attention. Even the kids that would walk home from the bus stop were gone at this point. 10 minutes later, a car pulls up. I still remember this car because for some reason it had patches of cloth on it in random places, as if the owner were trying to make a quilted car. The ugliness of the car doesn't matter. I just thought it was odd. Anyway, an older lady gets out of the car and begins walking towards me as I'm still pacing back and forth. I see her and stop, and then suddenly I heard a voice behind me asking that lady what she was doing. Without taking her eyes off me, the lady said, "Oh, my daughter called me and told me my granddaughter was pacing back and forth on this street, and for me to come and pick her up." By the time the voice from behind me was next to me, I saw it was one of my mum's friends. She put her arm around me and told the lady that I was the only one there and that I was with her. The crazy lady glared at us for a second before storming off to her car and driving away quickly. Turns out the car was sitting there the whole time while my friend and her mum and she were watching to make sure I was picked up. She took me over to her car and called my grandma to ask if it was okay for her to take me home. If it hadn't been for her staying around to make sure I was collected, I would have been living a very different life right now. So, to the lady with the ugly car, let's not meet again.
I'm going to preface this by saying I went to boarding school for 6 years. This boarding school was in the middle of a one-stop light town and on a hill 800 feet up. The school used to be an old monastery. It was hundreds of years old and huge, 4 stories including a basement where there was a boiler room and long hallways. Not all of these stories happened to myself, but the people who told me them were reliable enough to believe. Also, the school didn't want us telling stories to other people because they were afraid that it would make them not want to go to the school, due to it being haunted. The first one happened to me. I used to be in charge of cleaning the gymnasium at night. Every student had a job that they had to do either at night or in the morning to help take care of the school. Taught you some practical things and all. Anywho, I was there by myself that night getting ready to start sweeping the gym. The gym had 2 floors to it. The upstairs part was the weightlifting area, and you could see it fully from the bottom part of the gym, where the basketball court was. As I stepped into the gym, one of the basketballs starts rolling a bit. I looked around to see if any doors are open. None are. I chalk it up to some randomness, but see that it is continuing to roll. As I watch it, it makes a full circle around the entire gym and stops right next to my feet. At this point, I'm a bit scared, but figured it was nothing. I heard a creaking coming from the second floor and look up. There's a girl there, just staring right at me. As soon as I made direct eye contact with her, she bolts to the stairs that would take her to me. She let out a scream that I cannot describe. I was terrified and frozen in place. Thankfully, she didn't come to me, but took a left and bolted through the main doors of the gym. They didn't open. She just went right through them. And then I just noped the hell out of there. There was a chapel that was in the middle of the school, really. This is a non-religious school, so we used it for musical performances and all that sort of stuff. I was in choir for the years that I was there, so I was very used to performing in it. There was stained glass on all of the windows and such. Every time you walked in there, it always felt as if someone was watching you. It wasn't only me, but there were multiple people who felt that way. There was a big grand piano that was on the opposite side of where you walked in that was our stage. People would go in there at night and practice on it just for play or fun. Most people who would just go in there and only turn on the stage lights and leave the rest off while they were practicing. This story isn't something that I witnessed, but a friend of mine. She was playing on the piano by herself and just having fun practicing. While in the middle of a song, the keys next to her start going up and down, as if trying to add another part to her song. She jokingly said, "Hey, stop, that doesn't go along with what I'm doing." She immediately felt as if someone has boxed her ears and just became really dizzy. She freaked out and bolted out of there. She came crying down to the area where all of the students hung out on their free time. She told myself and a few friends the story and took quite a while to get her to calm down. Many people have seen a girl in a white dress constantly roaming that area. Another was at the high school of the school was on the highest floor of the building. One night, one of the seniors was studying late trying to graduate. He was working on something at about 3 a.m., and one of the window blinds started flickering. You know that noise blinds make when wind goes through them? He thinks nothing of it until it starts happening on the other side of the room. This is a huge room. It fits over 200 students in it. He goes over to the windows to close it. and he finds that it isn't even open. He laughs and thinks he must be just really tired. He goes back to continue studying, and a blind on the other side of the room starts going. Then another, and another, until all of them are going. There are about 30 plus windows on the top floor. He said he just stood there dazed about the whole situation until all of them just stopped at the same time. He left his stuff out and ran to his dorm room. His roommate said he looked like he had seen a ghost. Another job I had around the school was preparing the salad bar we had for lunch and dinner. To do this, I would have to get out everything we would need for the day from the basement and the giant freezer we had down there. I would then have to wash it and cut and peel everything. I was one of the first people up every morning to do this job. I would get up about 6 a.m. to do this every day. I hated having to go into the giant freezer on my own when no one else was up, and it was pitch black outside. It was one of the few things I never liked doing. The reason for this is the story. I got up at about 6 a.m. As soon as I woke up, I was feeling uneasy. I quickly took my shower and got dressed so I can get to the lunchroom at about 6:30. The person in charge of the kitchen was already up and getting everything warmed up. I said hello and checked out what we would need. I made a list and headed down. Now, that feeling of uneasiness was there the whole time. Through my whole shower, walking the dark hallways in the morning, and even when I got to the kitchen. I opened the freezer and felt the cold blast of air. Needless to say, I could have cut diamonds with how cold it was. I stepped inside and started getting vegetables. As I was reaching for one, I heard a giggle. This wasn't a normal one, but like a small child giggle. I instantly froze and whipped around. No one. I brushed it off and continued. Another giggle. I was like, no way. This is not happening to me. Flick, lights go off in the freezer. I still had a bit of light because I left the door open. I started seeing the door close, and it locked from the outside. I bolt for the door because I knew I would be locked in there for at least 15 minutes with the lights off if I didn't. I caught it right before it closed. Again, I hear another giggle. This time it was right behind me. I screamed. I was 17 and screamed like a girl. I ran upstairs, told the guy I wasn't feeling well, and went off and hid in my room till everyone else got up in the morning.
When I was 14, I was taking a 3D modeling class at my online school and had a teacher who I'll call John Doe. He was around 60 at the time. John Doe was a little friendly. He would always ask to Skype and would talk about subjects unrelated to school. If I had my audio on, he'd ask for me to turn on my video. He'd also ask me to lower my camera when I was wearing tank tops and whatnot. He'd say I was the most beautiful girl in Hawaii, and would tell me how lovely I looked and be very complimentary. He sort of opened up to me in a way that's unusual for teachers to do so. He also always gave me A+, so I appreciated that. Never an imperfect score. My 14-year-old self had never had someone open up in that way, so I went along with it. It kind of intrigued me. I don't mind because he always gave me perfect grades and was always flirting towards me. He'd look at my chest when we were Skyping and would constantly compliment my physical appearance. He'd say we should meet in person sometime and asked where I lived. He'd say he'd swing by even though it was far, even if it were just to hang out, and that he would love to see me in person. But that never materialized. This complimentary behavior and Skyping carried on for months, until he randomly disappeared from school and Skype. I started searching his name and found out that he had complimented on girls around my age's YouTube accounts with very similar jargon. I don't know what the reason was as to why he was dropped or reassigned from the school. All I know is that he was, and I never heard from him again. At that age, I didn't think anything was wrong with his behavior, but now, I feel it's apparent it was a hint of inappropriate, and I'm glad that it didn't escalate or get any worse.
Mrs. M, it's been about 12 years or so now. I know you don't work there anymore, thankfully. I don't know what could possess an adult woman, less than 50, to torment and torture a child to their breaking point. Maybe you're just a miserable old lady who was a loser in school and so targeted other losers to bring yourself up. But how you treated me and evidently others was not only unprofessional, but very cruel and damaging. I was a good student before. Mrs. M had my family members in years prior. Unlike me, my cousins and siblings are rowdy and can be a handful. She had words with my family before, so when I came along, I was the symbol of my family of which she would take out her anger upon. I was meek and obedient, a perfect target. Mrs. M would humiliate me at any chance she would get. She would bring me in front of her class, call me stupid, idiot, ugly, pointed out when my legs weren't shaved, told me I looked like a boy. Mind you, I had long hair and stuff, just didn't wear makeup at that age. Talked to me very slowly if I asked questions, talked to me like an actual dog, told me I smelled bad. The list goes on and on. She would sometimes aggressively pat me on the head and shout, "Good girl," when I completed one of her dog commands. She would actively encourage other kids to make fun of me as well, and further isolated me from everyone. I started to fear any interaction with her. I feared my classmates as well. A boy in my class was being relentless and made me cry one day. So I retaliated and threw a pencil at him. I was berated heavily and treated even worse after that. So I learned to shut down and take it all. My grades slipped, I cried every day at home. I kept most of it to myself, which Mrs. M probably knew I would, which is why she was so hard on me. My parents did try to get my classes switched, but the school refused. Not only did Mrs. M act like an angel around other adults, but the other classes were apparently packed to capacity so I couldn't switch. But I also don't think my parents tried very hard. The teacher conferences made things worse each time. She'd be alright for a day or two, but the hammer would come down harder. I had to keep all the torment inside to survive. She made fresh hot chocolates for the class the day before Christmas break. When she gave me mine, I was scared and accidentally knocked it over on myself. Instead of being concerned in the slightest because it was literally scalding hot, she just let out a flurry of screams and threatened that I had better get it cleaned quickly and spotless, or she would make me sorry. I did as I was told, and ignored the searing pain in my foot. I was not allowed to call to get a change of clothes, and I was the only one not allowed to have more. The pain in my foot stabbed literally every second. It didn't let up all day, but I was so terrified. I said nothing and didn't shed a single tear, though it hurt like hell. When I got home and pulled my sock off, my skin came off with it from the burn. My mother was livid and finally stood up for me. After Christmas break, Mrs. M was so overly sugary to me. "Why didn't you tell me about your foot, sweetie?" And was overly accommodating. It scared me. I thought it was a trap. But to my surprise, it lasted about 2 weeks. Must have had her ass handed to her. She wasn't as bad as before, but still sought to crush my spirit. On the last day of school, she refused to let me take any pictures of her. She was very grouchy that day towards me. Almost acted defeated, because although my grades were bad, I skimmed and was moving to middle school. Her dog was off its leash and she was powerless to keep her toy. She was hoping I'd fail. After 6th grade, I stopped caring about school. I failed a year, barely skirted by others. Landed in a dropout prevention program in high school. I had few friends, none of which I still have. I found it hard to trust teachers or authority figures anymore. I never made scenes or anything, I just sat quiet and did nothing. Before, I actually tried. I actually cared. And I had teachers disappointed in me because how well I performed in math and on tests. I've never had test anxiety and they wanted me in the mathletes one year. But I just didn't care. Which I attribute at least in part to Mrs. M. She changed my life for the worse. The psychological damage Mrs. M did to me cut deep. It's hard to convey in a brief post what it was like every day for that whole year. She tore down what confidence I had. She made me afraid to trust anyone. She made me believe I was worthless. She made me feel every insult and criticism to the bone. She made me close into myself and learn to take abuse. She made me believe I was completely alone and had no one in my corner. I was stupid, ugly, worthless, not even human. The kids from my school that came with me reinforced it as well. They also believed I was still just a dumb dog and treated me as such. She dug her claws in deep, and the scars still remain. I've tried to grow past it, but it's a hard thing to overcome. So to you, Mrs. M, you are not a teacher. You are an abusive sociopath who used her power of authority to tear down and relentlessly torture a child. I hated you then. But as an adult, I just feel sad for you. I don't know what could possibly go through an adult's mind that would make them see a vulnerable little girl as a target for sick games. Maybe you saw yourself in me and hate yourself. Since we were both kind of outcasts, you desperately tore me down and encouraged others so you could finally feel like you belonged, even if it was with a bunch of children. Either way, I'm glad you were finally removed years later and hope your stain on the world is soon wiped clean. I hope the others that you did this to live happy lives without having you as even a passing thought. We are not weak and do not deserve to be held as your victims. You did teach us that there are bad people out there. We may have struggled from it, but we pushed on. Hopefully none of us will ever meet you again.
This happened when I was in 11th grade and was 16. I knew it was messed up at the time, but it's been 3 years now, and I realize just how really messed up it was. I was friends with this boy since middle school. We'd known each other a while, and he was always a little strange. Kind of socially awkward, but who isn't in high school? He'd recently come out as pansexual, and told me he liked this boy that was gay, and wanted me to get him a date with said boy. Somehow I made this work, and they went on a few dates, but ultimately it didn't work out, and things were left a little bit weird between the two. He then told me he liked a girl who I was familiar with, and asked me to get him a date with her. Again, I made it work. This girl was also super strange, incredibly awkward, but had some underlying issues she was dealing with. They were a bad couple. Their first date, they went to a nearby waterfall that she wanted to climb down. She got stuck, and they had to call the police. Things were very intense for a short amount of time between them, before they ultimately cut it off, because she went to the hospital for trying to end her own life, as I'm not sure what led to that. I apologized to my guy friend, and he said that everything was fine. A few days later, he lets loose on someone's Facebook status that he is going to shoot up my high school. He has a plan, posts blueprints of the school, and draws out where he's going to go first. He drags another student into it, who is known for being crazy and has anger issues, but is completely innocent in the story, and was horrified his name was dragged into it. He targets me specifically, calls me horrible names and threatens me, and says that all of this is my fault. Me and another student talk to him over the status, telling him to calm down, while other students egg him on. It was super scary because this wasn't something I ever thought would happen in my city, let alone my school. I take screenshots and email the principal, and our assistant principal. They take this super serious, and the police get involved that same weekend. Cue questioning police presence on our campus for 2 weeks, and I and a few other students involved have to get restraining orders against my friends. He has a court date, and I'm not even allowed to go there or be a part of it, or even be updated about it, which I'm still a bit peeved off about. He was removed from our school, and I haven't seen or heard from him since. I'd be very glad to never meet him again.
Before going to high school, I went for 8 years to a school in my neighborhood. This school was a few hundred meters from my house, which would be covered in either a 10-minute walk or a 3-minute car ride. One winter evening back in 2010 to 2011, I was leaving school with a bunch of my classmates, and we were headed for the bus station. We were all about 13, 14, and in 8th grade back then. Among those classmates, there was a friend who lived 1 street away from me, with whom I'd usually walk to and from school. Generally, we left school, we would rather take the 10-minute walk through the side streets to our homes, instead of walking all the way to the boulevard, take the bus, then walk back into the side streets. The reason we were going for the bus station was that it was about 6 p.m. on a winter day, and therefore it was already as dark as it would be at midnight. Two preteen kids walking all by themselves through those dark streets wouldn't be a wise thing to do. As we're waiting for the bus, I notice a bunch of boys approaching my friend. These boys were considerably taller than us. We were both around 1.6 meters tall, and they easily had 10 centimeters over us. They weren't adults, though. They asked for his phone in order for them to make a call. This is where I'm glad I wasn't by myself at this point. I'm also glad that they didn't come to me first. I was one of the youngest kids from my class, and grew up to be more naive than the rest. My friend was about 8 months older than me, and with far more street smarts. He told them he doesn't have a phone. That's when I caught on to what was going on, since I knew full well that he had his phone on him. They came to me and asked the same thing. I responded the same way my friend did. The bus arrived and we all climbed in, including my other classmates and the 4 older guys. While I was waiting at the door, my friend was talking to our other classmates. Halfway through, he climbed down next to me and started whispering. "I just spoke to some of the other guys. They live near those thugs. They said that they are most likely planning to chase after us after we climb down and steal our phones. When we climb down for the bus, let's run." All right then. We both go to my house. My house was 1 street away from the bus station and close to the boulevard, while his was the next street over and much deeper. In other words, we had to run less than 100 meters to my house, and we would have to run about twice as much to his. I didn't sense any real danger in this situation, since I didn't think these guys would bother chasing 2 boys who most likely have nothing of value on them. It was the safest option though, as I was underweight and easily the weakest boy from our class, while he was overweight and clearly lacked agility. We probably could barely hold our own in a 2v2 fight, let alone 2v4. I was also immediately down for the run since I loved the idea of the thrill it would give us. We got out and my friend put his hand on my shoulder to steady me, since we were still in a crowded bus station, and there was no need to run yet. We walked fast to the only street we had to cross, and after making sure no cars were coming, we sprinted. Since he was a bit ahead of me, he could afford to lose a bit of distance, so I asked him if he could look back. "Are they actually following us? They are crossing the street right now." Still in disbelief, I turned my head to look. They were indeed crossing the street, running between upcoming cars after us. This sidewalk, unlike the bus station, was completely empty, so if they caught us here, there would be no witnesses unless a car would drive down to the boulevard that very moment. We hurried to my street and turned the corner. I quietly opened the gate and ushered my friend in, after which I got in and quietly closed it. We stood there in the shade of the trees in my front yard, watching the street-lit boulevard through my fence, to make sure they didn't know where we went. They reached the crossroad and stopped. They looked around dumbfounded, not realizing where we went. We silently got into my house and told my mom why I came home with an unannounced guest. My friend called his mom to come pick him up with her car, since he obviously couldn't walk home. I know I'm not a very good storyteller, but I tried to make this event sound as exciting as it felt back then. I think I met one of those guys at least once after the chase. Thankfully, he didn't recognize me.
This happened many years ago. I don't remember it myself, but my mum told me about it, and it really creeps me out. I was in either 1st, 2nd, or 3rd grade when it happened. Anyway, I was a little kid. The school has their own blocks for different grades. 1st to 3rd grade are in their own block called AB block. The rest of the blocks, named C, D, and E, had their own theatre/drama studios in the basement. The AB block was in no way allowed in this studio, unless the older kids had a play going on. No adults would let us down there. With that being said, here's the story. I walked to school, and when I got there, a man I didn't know at all asked me for help in the basement. I have 2 older brothers who went to the same school, so I knew every teacher at the time, and they knew me. But I didn't know this guy. That gave me the first alert. The second alert was that he asked me for help. I was in the AB block. In other words, kids are the last people you'd ask for help. The third alert was that we were under no circumstances allowed in the basement when no play was going on. I ran to the nearest group of kids, my mum told the school, and the school did nothing about it. Nonetheless, that could have gone badly. I'm glad I was smart enough to not give him the time of day.
2002. I was 14 years old starting freshman year. I was an awkward, nerdy girl that didn't know how to handle attention from boys, so you could say I made things worse for my situation. I had a knack for making friends with the weird people no one liked, but I tried to be friendly with everyone I met, so it wasn't a big deal to me. Unfortunately, that was also my downfall. Clubs were a big deal, and they actually had an anime club, so of course I was all about that. First club meeting, I sat next to a couple of friends and soaked it all up. I thought I was finally with my people. Then here comes Stalker Kid. I'd use his real name, but to this day I still have no clue what it is. He sat in front of me, and being that person, I said hi. I could tell he was uncomfortable and didn't know anyone, so I was just being nice. And boy, did that guy cling to me for that one word. At first, he would just find me during lunch and just stand there mumbling things to me. He had such a soft voice, high-pitched, mousy little guy that you just felt unnerved when he spoke to you. The way he would look at you as he spoke, I could never look him in the eyes. After a while, it became more about asking my personal life and what I was into. Me being dumb and naive, I tried to be friendly and chat while feeling incredibly uncomfortable. After a while, my friends and I would move to different tables, benches, even hallways to avoid him. But he always found me. After about a year of this, my best friend finally told me that if I didn't tell him to go away, he would. I really didn't want him around me anymore anyway. So sure, go ahead. So one day, during lunch, here comes Stalker Kid with his signature greeting, barely above a whisper. Hey. My buddy just goes, dude, she's not interested. Screw off. Looking hurt, he shuffles away. I was like, man, you didn't have to be so hard on him, but thanks. I didn't see him much around school after that except for club days where he would just sit across the room and stare at me while my best friend glared at him. Cut to me being 16 and driving now. Minus the awkward club days, I didn't really notice anything from him. That is until an old gray beat-up car started parking next to me extremely close. One day after school, he was waiting for me in that car. He started asking me how I'd been, what about prom, and all that stuff. I was trying to rack my brain on how he knew that was my car unless he had been watching me before and after school. I started getting there later and leaving later to avoid him, because he was like clockwork. Finally, a boy I used to be friends with in elementary school was walking out with me and made a comment about how that guy is always next to my car, and asked if he was my boyfriend. I immediately said no, and he's always following me around, and I hated it. It was really starting to freak me out. Bless this guy because he walked right up to him and scared him off, threatening if he ever parked near me again, he would beat him up. I figured maybe that was enough to keep him away. So again, there was a small space where I would hear nothing of him except for my friends, who had classes with him, telling me how creepy he was. One friend had art class with him, and said he would draw naked women constantly in his books. All big-breasted, sexy, posing women. Classy guy. Junior year is wrapping up, and I started taking my BFF, Phil, we'll call him, to and from school. He was on my way, so I figured why not. At some point, Phil started noticing that little gray car was always heading the same way after school. I made a joke thinking, what if Stalker Kid lived next to him? Small world, right? I could only be so lucky. One day, as per usual, little gray car was following us, so we took a detour. Sure enough, he was with us every step of the way, and it was no longer a joke. We both started freaking out. I pushed that gas pedal as hard as my foot could push it, and noped the hell out of there. I went home and told my mom everything, because at this point I knew this wasn't normal. She shoved it aside and said I was probably seeing things. Well, it came time for our end-of-year club party. Of course, SK, we'll call Stalker Kid from now on, was a senior, so I would never have to see him again. For whatever stupid reason, I offered to host the party, thinking he hasn't gone to one yet. Let's celebrate this moment. I was terrified when my dad let him in the door. I don't remember giving him any invitation to the party, so someone must have given it to him. He spent the whole party talking to me, my dad being all buddy-buddy with him, asking me where my room was. I just wanted to cry and hide. It was all downhill after that. I remember there were days where I would hear a car pull up outside my front door, and my room having a window that saw the front. I would call my buddy Phil and peek to see if it was him. 3 times in 1 month. I just hid under my desk and cried on the phone with Phil. Other events from school would be him asking a girl I played softball with to prom, only to dump her and follow me all night. This includes to the after prom, where I never saw him in person. Our high school had a radio TV channel for kids to run, and during prom they would record us going up the stairs and playing around in the gym at after prom for the parents to see their kids having fun. Took one of my friends to point it out, but it showed me playing DDR for a while against my friend Phil, and SK was standing right behind me watching for a good 5 minutes. Never knew. And that one that still creeps me out to this day is graduation for his class. Our classes were so big, they did a day and night ceremony where all the students had to attend day 1. I was scanning the crowd to see my friends who were graduating when I saw a hand wave as I passed by. I looked back, and of course it was SK waving at me. How he picked me out of a crowd of thousands I will never know. 2006 senior year was great. No signs of creepy SK to the point where I kinda forgot about him. I graduate, I choose a college in town, get a job at a local retail store, and move on. Life was beginning to be normal. I worked the gaming department, so you get the weird randos once in a while. One that I saw a lot was this little Mexican guy with glasses. This is important. Who never purchased anything but would just walk around from time to time. Then, SK comes strolling through the doors and walks into gaming and just talks. I ask how he knew I worked there. He says his friend saw me and knew we were friends. I tried to radio for help over and over for someone to come and get him out. Finally, a big guy from computers walks by and asks for my help in the back. Once he pulls me to safety, I tell him everything. From that point, security is aware and is told to watch for this guy. Of course, he wasn't going to do anything physical, so all they could do for me is watch out for him. So every time he came in, they would walkie me, and I would dip back to the warehouse. I started seeing his friend, who we will call Ninja Friend, NF for short, constantly, and all he ever did was walked around on his phone. I began to suspect he was texting SK to tell him I was at work, because sure enough, 10 minutes later, he would come in too. So I tested this theory, and started walking randomly around the store. At one point, a friend who worked register asked why I would do this, so I had her take a walk with me on her break. I told her this NF would follow us everywhere, even just going down a random aisle. Sure enough, he did, and she began freaking out. A few minutes later, I told her my stalker would walk through the doors again. Sure enough, so I'm making my way to the warehouse, and out steps NF from an aisle, and says, "She's right here." I just stared at him like, who the hell do you think you are? SK walks up behind me and asks why I'm always running away from him, and he lost my number and asks if I can give it to him again. I say, knowing damn good I will never give it to him. I go to the warehouse, write, "This is where I work, don't ever come here again," and hand it to him. Glare at his friend, walkie security about him, and sit in the warehouse and break down. Security tells me later that he also cried while they took him out. Later that day, as I'm leaving work, security offers to walk me to my car. This, of course, isn't the rules, but friends care about friends. So I say sure. SK is out by my car waiting for me. So this is where security says screw it and calls the police, which are conveniently next to their headquarters. He books it when he sees the car. A few years go by. Nothing comes up. I buy a fancy new car and I don't see him much. I'm thinking that did the trick and I'm finally free. 2012. My buddies and I are leaving work ready to hit a night at the bar per usual Thursday deal. We're all walking out the door, where we all have to stand and wait to hear the alarm sound to verify it's armed. As we're walking out, I hear it. That awful sound. Hey. I cringe, grab my friend's arm and turn. There he is, leaning on his car, waiting. My friend recognizes him and asks what he wants. Guy says he just wants to talk to me. He didn't ever see my car, so he didn't think I worked here anymore. His other friend is sitting in the back seat of his car, just staring at me blankly. I start to think the worst. If my friend leaves me here, my gut tells me I'm not coming into work the next day. Or ever. I'm terrified that he's had years of time to think about our last encounter, where I wrote my number down and made him cry. I grab my friend's arm tighter. My friend goes off, pretends to be my boyfriend, and rips into him. My friend is about 2 feet taller and much, much bigger. They get into it, and I'm just standing in the parking lot. And I'm a terrible person for this, but I'm sure you understand at this point. Thinking, kick his ass. He spooks SK so bad that I'm pretty sure he pissed himself before getting in his car and booking it. Ever since, if he comes into the store, my friend stares him down from his office, and he leaves. Never has bought anything in all these years. Years later, I've moved on, gotten married, and moved out of town. Recently, we moved back to start a business, and to this day I still feel myself looking behind me at stores just in case I randomly bump into him. He caused me to have anxiety, mental and emotional pain, fear, and trust issues for a decade. Even after moving on, I still feel the effects to this day, and I never even knew his name.
I was around 6, and in Ireland, I would be in senior infants, I think first grade in America. I remember this day well, but some things are a bit blurry, as it did happen over 12 years ago. School had just finished for the day, and I was waiting for my parents to come and collect me. Both of them worked, so I was used to waiting for them. I was waiting for about 10 minutes outside the school gates, when out of nowhere this huge woman came up and grabbed me by the arm, insisting she was a friend of my mother's, and said something along the lines of, "I know where your mother is." Being a dumb kid, I followed her, and she guided me to the church directly beside the school. Her car was in the parking lot of the church. She opened the car door and threw me in. That hurt. I was confused as to why my mother's friend would hurt me, and I knew something was wrong. She didn't get in the car, but she locked the door and waited outside it, looking around as if she were waiting for someone. I thought of all the stranger danger warnings I was taught as a child. I began to cry and try to open the door, but of course nothing happened. I remember looking down at my Winnie the Pooh backpack and my eyes being blurry with tears. Next thing I heard was arguing from outside the car, and I looked to my left. There was my best friend's mother shouting at the woman to let me go and threatening to call the guards and police if she did not. I heard the woman saying that I was her daughter and she wouldn't let me go. Looking back on it at this part, I laugh, because I was a very pale white child and this woman was clearly darker skinned. I'm not sure how her argument could have made sense in her own head. After a lot of shouting, the woman unlocked the car and let me go. I assume because I was too much hassle. I was in tears and I ran away. I saw my mother and ran. My mother asked the woman what happened, and the woman flat out lied to my mother and my friend's mother, saying that she was told to pick me up from school by her friend, then got into her car and left. One of the worst parts about this is that my mother believed her, and to this day insists that this incident never happened, even though my friend and his mother remember it. So it couldn't be a dream. I don't know what would have happened to me or who this woman was waiting for me after she locked me in her car, but I'm very grateful for my friend's mother, as I could owe her my life.
So, it was a fall afternoon. I believe it was a little bit before school started, but I'm honestly not quite sure. I just remember it being a little cold at the time. My friend, who is the same age as me, and I decided to go to the playground one day. It was a nice playground for the school we both attended, all wooden, fairly big. We would do this from time to time, so it wasn't just something we did on a whim or randomly for the first time. We had nothing to be afraid of. We were walking to the park and passed the mail lady. We said hi and said we were heading to the playground. She told us to be careful and that she'll be right over there, and gestured to the next street. She was a street away from where we would be. We didn't think anything of this since it was Elkton, and we were only kids. So warnings were always something you'd hear, even from your parents anytime you went out, despite it being a small neighborhood. Looking back, it seems weird, but I still don't really think anything of it. When we approached the playground, we noticed two older men, at least in their 20s, who had this small child with them, or that they were watching. I never found out which. The kid looked 6 or younger, clearly a girl. This isn't extremely important to the story, but I wanted to note it because I still find that particularly odd to this day. My friend and I were talking to one another, just mindless conversation about, what are we going to do now? Like, what do you want to go on? and also noting on the men there. Suddenly, we still have no clue why, these men started to chase us. So we had these 2 grown men chasing us, and obviously we bolted. We ran through a shortcut that was between 2 fences that went all the way across the street I lived on. While running, I, a useless human in bad situations, started having an asthma attack, so my friend practically had to carry me half the way. We went back to my house and told my parents. They flipped out and drove us to the playground to confront them, but they were gone by then. Now, I'm not sure if it was the same day or the next day, but we later told our friend who lived on the same street as me, and she was aware of the situation. When talking to this other friend, she was told she had to go to her grandparents' house, which was on the other side of the neighborhood. She had to walk there. Now, after being told this information, she didn't want to walk alone, so my friend and I went with her. And what would you know it? On the way there, just simply guess what had happened. 2 men in their 20s or later started chasing us. Scariest part of this, we don't even know if it was the same 2 men. Either way, we ran again. Remember that asthma attack I had previously? I had another one. So my friend offered to help again, but I refused and was like, "Save yourself." Dramatic, yes, but who knows what could have happened. Instead of her helping me again, me, the dumbass, ran behind a house to catch my breath. Once I had relieved the attack and noticed the men were gone, I sprinted to her grandparents' house where they were glad to see I was alive. We called my dad, and he picked me and my friend up, and we went driving through the neighborhood to find them. We saw 2 men walking down a street that we thought could have been them, but we couldn't be sure. We drove up and asked something like, "Hey, see anyone chasing 3 little girls lately?" Or something like that. I don't remember. They said no, of course, and we didn't really take any action after that. Moral of the story, don't go to Elkton, or Maryland in general. Even Ocean City isn't safe. We ended up moving out a year or so later because a halfway house moved in next door, so there were recovering drug addicts, more or less 10 feet away from our house. We moved out within a month of that.
When I was 7 years old, I was in kindergarten. My birthday is late in the year, so I couldn't apply when I was 6 like most kids, since it was through the school year. We had a teacher, Mr. H, but this isn't about him. It's about a substitute I had one day. I can't actually remember his name, as he was only there for one day. But Mr. H was amazing, very caring and good with kids. This substitute was not. He was generally very weird and quiet, and didn't talk to us much besides what was absolutely necessary, like the daily story time, etc. The issues arrived at story time. I was wearing a skirt with leggings under it. I was never feminine. Turns out I'm trans, which makes lots of sense, so I didn't cross my legs like a lady. Like my parents taught me. But hey, I was 7. So after story time, we had that free time period. Some kids painted, some just talked, some napped or ate snacks, and I was an avid reader, so I was reading as usual, sitting in the corner. The substitute was sitting there too. Nobody else was in this corner, and the substitute turns to me and says very bluntly, "Are you wearing panties? Because it doesn't look like you are." Keep in mind I didn't have my legs wide spread, just not crossed, and had leggings on under my skirt. Also, for the record, I was, and at the time I was being abused at home, so I honestly didn't think much of it. That sort of stuff was normal to me at the time, but I was a little bit put off. I decided to read elsewhere, and got up to move to the other side of the classroom. The substitute teacher followed me throughout the entire block. The substitute followed me around the classroom, keeping his eye on me as I did various things like playing with the sand table, painting or reading. Every time we were doing anything complicated, like basic addition or spelling, he'd be hovering over me even though I didn't need help. He was also very touchy, constantly touching my shoulder, running his fingers through my hair amongst other things, although he never directly touched me inappropriately. But I was very uncomfortable with being touched at all due to what was happening at home. I ended up going home unscathed, and I honestly didn't even tell my parents. I didn't even realize it until years later when I was 11 and coping with the rest of my trauma. that I realized how really creepy that all was.
Right now, I'm a senior in high school. When I was a freshman, I had my two closest friends. I'll call them Tara and Rhea. Tara had a childhood friend that also went to school with us, and I'll call him Bob. Anyway, we were all pretty good friends. We would always hang out as friends do. I wasn't necessarily close with Bob, but I talked to him a lot. Pretty much every day we would sit on a bench next to Tara's locker and wait for her after school. We talked a lot then. Then on the last day of school before finals week, Rhea came up to me and said that Bob had a crush on me and was gonna ask me out. I didn't like him like that, so I told her to tell him that I wasn't allowed to date till I was 16. Yes, I should have told him myself, but I was 14 and had never had a boy ask me out before, so I thought I handled it pretty well. After that, I never really talked to Bob anymore. I kind of avoided him. Sophomore year, he tried asking me to one of the dances, but I turned him down again. I continued to avoid him. Him and Tara started getting really close as well, like inseparably close. He was like super protective of her. Junior year, there were a couple of days where he sat with me and a couple other people at lunch, but that didn't last long. He went back to eat alone at a table. First semester this year, he still sat alone, and we asked him a few times if he wanted to sit with us, but he always declined. A few nights ago, my friend Diana called me and said to stay away from Bob because he might be dangerous, and he might target me because of freshman year. I asked what she was talking about, so she told me. A guy I'll call Cam started to talk to Tara a lot this year. He's a nice guy, too. I then come to find out that Bob wasn't too happy about Cam starting to talk to Tara more, and Bob actually threatened Cam at gunpoint. So Cam told my now friend Ethan, and Ethan told Diana, who told me. Diana and Ethan are both in a group chat on some app with Tara, Bob, and another girl called Kate. Yesterday, Bob started posting a bunch of gifs of some guy shooting up a school from a TV show, and at the top it said, 1, 2, 3, all the kids bullied me. But they're not so cool since I shot up the school. And then he posted a picture outside of the group chat, but still in the app, of a smiley face pointing a gun at the screen with the caption that read, "You know who you are." Kate asked him about it and took screen caps before he deleted it all. She sent them to our school's social worker along with Ethan and maybe Diana. So the school does know about it and are talking to Bob about it. Bob has apparently threatened a few times that he wanted to shoot up the school, and says he has a gun in his car. We have also tried to talk to Tara about this, but she doesn't seem to care or is trying to protect him. We aren't super sure as of right now. So far, this is all we've gotten to, but I'll keep you guys posted on any future events. Update 1. He's been kicked out of school until he gets a therapist. I'm not saying this solved the problem that we are out of danger, but he has to get help now, so let's see if this helps. Update 2. He's back in school and nothing has happened. I think he might be better now. We're graduating in a little more than a month, and after that he will hopefully be gone for good.
This happened almost 15 years ago, when I was 7. My best friend's mum would babysit my brother and I before and after school. My mum would usually drop us off at her house at around 6 a.m. She would make us breakfast, and then the three of us would walk to our elementary that was less than a 10-minute walk away. To preface, we would walk through an adjacent neighborhood, through this small wooded area that had an enclosed bridge that led us to the back of our elementary. The elementary sits back in a long tree line that runs about a half-mile north and another mile south. Anyway, we're about to get to the turn where we walk into the tree line to the bridge, and this guy comes cruising down the street. At first, I don't even think we noticed him considering how young we were. But right when he's about 10 feet away from us, he slows down to virtually 0 miles per hour. There was nothing that stood out about his appearance either. He was middle-aged and white and very generic looking. We all stare at the car and start walking super slowly. If we stop, he would stop. If we walk, he would slowly go. During this whole ordeal, he has a blank expression on his face. Not anger, no smirk, just this sinister deadness almost. This went on for about 5 minutes, because we were too scared he'd jump out of the car if we turned our backs on him, and I was mainly scared for my little brother. Finally, he speeds off, and we run the rest of the way to school, and immediately go to the principal's office. And this is the point which we are bawling. We gave them our version of the story, his descriptions, and whatever else a 7-year-old is actually capable of giving. They take action by calling the cops and our parents. The cops come and we explain where it happened and the story again. Then our parents ended up taking us out of school. From then on, we weren't allowed to walk to school anymore, and our babysitter would take us. The reason this ended up being so creepy is because apparently there had been reports around the time of a guy who would sit under the bridge we walked over right by the school and watch people. They didn't know if he was homeless or if this was another guy who we encountered. They never caught him, and we never saw him again. Whether this was a more sinister encounter than we thought, or was he just bored, we will never know. I do know how bizarre it was though. Who stares at children that intently while driving by? He even turned his head around as he was driving. By his chance of luck, no other cars drove by during this whole ordeal, and I'd rather not meet him again.
This story is from when I was in school. Me and my friends, we stayed in this school hostel since the school insisted as our grades were not very good. Our school hostel is about a 10-minute walk from the school. Anyway, a little bit of background about my school goes like this. The building where my school is very old, and I mean very old. There are a lot of rumors regarding our school being haunted. Our school is massive. It looks like a palace in a way. Well, since our school is really old, there are a lot of repairing stuff going on. Anyway, when I was in 9th grade, there was a certain incident that still gives me goosebumps whenever I think about it. In our school, there are certain places we are not allowed to go or roam around. That may be because it was an old building and a few places were under construction. There was a lot of rumors regarding how people saw ghosts inside the hallway. So we used to ask the guards whether the school was really haunted or not. Most of the guards always refused to answer and joked around saying no such thing existed. However, there was this old woman who worked at our school for long enough to know about whether those rumors were actually just a rumor. We often used to ask her as a joke whether those rumors were true. Well, we were very young, and who doesn't get excited to hear some scary stories, right? And so she used to jokingly answer, saying, "You'll know about it once you stay here for the night." She also said sometimes she could hear footsteps and doors creaking on its own. I really enjoyed listening to those stories since I like spooky stuff. One day, me and my friends were gathered around by the fire since it was a cold winter night. We were chatting about our day in school, and what we'll do at the hostel and stuff. Then suddenly one of my friends came running. He looked really scared. When we asked what happened, he said someone pulled him from behind while he was in the bathroom. We were all shocked, as something like that never happened to any one of us. And besides, every one of my classmates were there with me at the time. We thought he was just trying to scare us, as he can get really funny sometimes. But his face and expression was very convincing. Honestly, I've never seen his face so terrified like that. Then a few of us went to check the bathroom, thinking someone might have pulled a prank. But no one was there. Everyone freaked out and called the school guard and told them what had happened. The school guard brushed it off, saying it must have been someone from our friends pulling pranks and sent us to the hostel room. To be honest, our school looks really creepy under the moonlit night. There was also this incident that happened with me. Since it was a winter season, it's pretty dark early in the morning, and our morning classes usually start around 6:15. That day, I was the earliest one to reach the school from our hostel room, and that day, walking through the school gate felt really spooky. It felt as if someone was watching me. I gathered my strength and walked all the way to our classroom, and no one was there. It was dark and scary. I couldn't dare to get inside the classroom. And suddenly, I felt as if someone was there. I suddenly got shivers down my spine. I decided to go back to the school gate and wait for my friends. Even though I love listening to scary stuff, that day I felt really terrified. Well, our school days were going normal until one day upon arriving at school, the guards told us that the school was closed. There was no festival of any kind or anything. So we asked the guard what was going on, and then the guard said someone from the 10th grade has died in the school. They said it was a suicide. One of my friends told me about the girl who died. She was someone I knew very well. She was very friendly and had no problem or any kind of disturbance from anyone. I couldn't believe she would commit suicide. We found out later about the place where she hung herself. You see, as I said earlier, that our school was going under construction at some places, and we weren't allowed to go in there. The place where she died was not accessible to anyone other than the guards. Only a few of the guards who did the night duty had the access to that place, as the floor was under complete lockdown. The stairs were all broken, so they had to lock down the whole one part of the building. And as I said, we didn't have proper lighting in our school. It's not possible to walk that way even if she had access to that floor. That place didn't have any kind of lights whatsoever. She was found at around 8:30 at night. Even finding her took around an hour, as no one had expected her to go all the way through. No matter how I tried to understand, it was just not possible for her to reach all the way there and hang herself. Everyone believed that a ghost must have lured her in there, or maybe it was a murderer. But seriously, as far as I know, she had no hard feelings towards anyone. The actual reason as to why she did it was never found. I don't know if the school purposefully didn't give out the information because it might harm the school's name, but everyone was shocked by that incident. A few days later, the school had called someone to clean the place and performed a ritual so that her soul could rest in peace. And until this day, I have no idea how she got herself to that place, so messed up and impossible to walk, and hung herself.
When I was around 8, during recess at school, I noticed a bunch of other kids outside a storage room, yelling and warning others not to approach because there was an eyeball staring back at you. I was curious because I didn't understand what they meant, but I could see their fear was real because their faces were pale white and they would try to deter me from taking a peek through the keyhole. I remember bending down slightly so that I could get a closer look inside, and sure enough there was an eyeball staring back at me, and it freaked me out so much I peed my pants on the spot. It was only later that day that I had ended up in the nurse's office because of the commotion us kids had created, that the janitor had to go into the room to inspect this whole mess. Turns out that someone had placed a mirror against that door, and the eyeballs we were seeing were our own reflections.
So I was watching the docu-series Dope today with my mom, and it reminded me of someone. Back in the 8th grade, I went to what was somewhat considered a ghetto school. I had drama for my first period in this class. I had 2 classmates called A and L. Anyway, A and L were your stereotypical 14-year-old potheads. I wasn't friends with them, per se, but we were friendly towards one another. Well, years go by, and of course, I lose contact with both of them. It wasn't until 12th grade I got into contact with L again, over Instagram. I also found A on Instagram, but we only followed each other. We didn't talk. L told me he and A were no longer friends, as A was getting into trouble. On A's Instagram, he'd post pics of him smoking, of firearms, etc. Well, I went to a college art gallery for a field trip with my AP art class. All is fun, and my friend decided to grab their newspaper. As we're on the bus, he reads this article stating 6 suspects of an armed break-in, or something like that. They had pictures of these 6 people, and one of those people turned out to be A. I gasped and told my friend, "Yo, I went to school with this kid. What the hell? I knew he was a bit of trouble, but not like this." When I got home, I called L and told him. L said, "Wow, I'm not surprised, to be honest. It was only a matter of time that he'd get arrested." I went on Instagram and A's profile was emptied out. I took a pic of the article and sent it to L and A, asking if he was okay or whatever. My message was read, but that was it. I'm sure he is out now, but wherever he is, A, let's not meet again. Hey everyone, Dark Narrator here. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I'm sure you're aware that I make horror content like Mortis. I narrate stories from true encounters like you've heard in this video, from anything like SCPs to narrating H.P. Lovecraft's work. All in all, there's something for everyone over there, so please subscribe if you liked what you've heard here. For a better understanding on what a typical video on my channel looks like, please go check out 6 terrifying tales from r/short scary stories. The link will be in the description below. As always, thank you guys for watching, and be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content from Mortis. Hit that little bell as well if you'd like to get notified when he posts. As always, see you later.